Have you ever had a really cute paper pad, but just a couple of the pages were kind of challenging? Hi, I'm Jess from JessCrafts.com, and I'm here to help you make the most of your crafty supplies and time. So let's get making. Today I have the Simple Stories 6x8 Crafty Things paper pad. It has 24 double-sided papers, and there are a lot of cute papers, cute colors. It is double-sided, which I always recommend because then you could use both sides. So if you do have one side of the paper that's challenging, you can just flip it over and ignore it. That is the easiest thing to do. But I want to show you how we can use some of those more challenging papers without just ignoring the other side today. Like what you could, how to approach them, how to think about them, how to look at them. And so we're going to look at 3 different papers from the paper pad today, and we're going to work with a new 6x8 paper busting template for 5x7 cards. This is number 7. That means there's 6 others available at jesscrafts.com. So this one will be the very first link in the video description, and then I will link you to where you can find the rest of them if you want to download more. You're like, yeah, I totally love 5x7 cards, or I really have some 6x8 paper to use. Okay, so the sketch calls for us to use 3x4 inch pieces. I like a sketch that when I'm trying to use challenging papers that actually uses a good chunk, and I'll show you like it uses a fairly large section of paper. This is 1/4 of the paper, so it's a good amount of the paper, and I think that actually helps. So what I have here are some papers from the collection that I would put in the, more challenging. This one says Snap, and I think that's Simple Stories. That's like a line of theirs, and it could also be referenced to a photo. But I don't know what I would do with that on a card. So I was thinking, well, of course there's the backside. The backside's super cute, but I don't want to use just the backside. Now, of course, that is, again, my number one recommendation. You're like, I have a challenging paper. I'm like, well, did you flip it over? Start there. But if I want to use the challenging part of it, I think, okay, well, this paper basically says I could use 1/2 of one side and 1/2 of the other. This snap is in the top half of the paper. So I'm actually going to flip how I cut it. I'm going to cut these 3x4 pieces out of the bottom. And so if I kind of just take a little eyeball look, you can use your a grid mat or something to help you kind of see what a 3x4 is. This is totally fine. Like I could just put an embellishment here, a sentiment here. I can use it that way. I can also use this if I want to for the cut up strips, because for 3x1 inch strips that I'm going to put to the edge of my card, I think this also works great. So I think I could use it either way. And then the other half, similarly, is just a little bit of grid paper and then some solid brown. So again, great for the strips or great for the focal point. Similarly, I keep going through my papers and thinking about things like this. With my 3x4 inch requirement, this side, very easy to use. It is directional, which sometimes makes it more challenging. This particular template works for directional paper. But if I take like a 3x4 chunk, that's actually super pretty. It's not hard to use at all, then it feels like. But when you see it like larger like this, you're like, how am I going to fit this onto a card? Do I have to just cut, my 4x5 1/4 inch piece off of them? What do I do with the scraps, etc.? Don't be afraid to chop them down a little bit. And on this side, you're only going to get a small portion of the design, but you also have this that looks clearly like the edge of a piece of notebook paper. And so to me that says, oh, put a sentiment right here. It's really framed out nicely. So by cutting up this design and breaking it up, not feeling like I have to use the whole thing, I think that I've gotten a really good result. And then for the strips that this particular sketch calls for, I'll use the back. So this one was challenging though. I was like, okay, I have idea. Like I could use this as its whole paintbrush self. I have a template that uses 6x8 cards on slimline cards. And so if you just cut this in half, you could take 1/2 of it, put it on a slimline card, put a sentiment, and be done. That's a great way to use it too. But I did my 3x4 inch thing. And then I was like, well, now it doesn't look like a paintbrush. But if I flip it over, my 3x4 section now looks like a flower pot. And that's great. My other 3x4 section would be solid black. Or I could use the other side, and then I could make the solid black my strips. So there's some versatility. I would say the back of the paper is a little bit challenging to me as well because it's supposed to look like a Cricut mat, I think is the idea, like a cutting mat for a die cutting machine. And so I'm like, you know, if I cut this up, does it look right out of context? So I'll kind of show you how that's handled. I don't think it's going to be that big a deal, but I do acknowledge that that is also challenging about this paper, and I do want to use the bottom of the other side. So I am going to have to address this top piece here. Okay, so I'm going to show you cutting just one of them. I don't want to keep you here forever, but I do want to talk about like my process for thinking about papers like this. So since this, I would say, is probably the most challenging one, let's cut this one. First, we can cut it in half to 3 by 8. And like I said, this is just so perfect for a slimline card, those 3.5 by 8.5 inch cards. I would just pop that on. That would be so cute. This other half would be kind of boring, but this one would be pretty. Okay, then I want to use the flower pot, as I'm going to call it here, and so I cut that down to 4 inches. Now this strip that's left here, I've got to cut it to use for my 3 by 1 inch strips that are here on the edge. So I'm going to cut that down, starting at 4, go to 3, 2, and then 1. And then I'll do the same thing with this piece where I'm going to cut it in half. So it's 2 pieces of 3 by 4. One of these is going to be used for the focal point and one needs to be turned into strips. I'm kind of thinking I'll use this one for the focal point because it has that like oddity back there with the top that looks like the cutting mat. So then I will cut this other piece into these really easy to use strips. Okay. And I do have several other designs if you don't like 5 by 7 cards, or if you just need more designs and ideas. I have several other templates that take a 6 by 8 piece of pattern paper and use a 3 by 4 section of it for A2 cards, maybe even for other 5 by 7 cards. So I'll try to remember to link a few of those in the video description as well. But now we have the pieces that we need for our card. We also do need to cut mats. I'm going to pick one color. I'm thinking probably like either a pink or a blue. You know what? It's probably going to have to be a pink because there's blue on this one, so I don't want that to stand out. And this is kind of like, it's a blue-green. And so I think pink will go with everything. And then I will cut all of my mats. To get the sizes you need for your cardstock mats, you just look here around the different pieces on the card sketch. So this shows you how to cut the pattern paper with no scraps, but the mat sizes are on the card sketch. So I cut some cardstock mats according to the measurements here on the sketch, and then I was able to assemble all of those pieces according to the sketch. I wanted to show you a couple things I did that like turned these challenging papers into these easy cards, and I've like eliminated the challenging pieces of them. So here on this one, I had the blue paper that looked like a cutting mat, and I've decided that I was just going to make some of them onto the black side so that the piece that had the cutting mat like hole at the top, I turned that over to the other side and it had black and then a little bit of the paintbrush. But because of the sketch, I knew I was going to be able to cover that up. So I strategically positioned it and then did a pattern so I could also pull in some of the blue. And then with this pattern, because I chose a pink, I wanted to make it really easy and do the same cardstock mat for all of them. I noticed that this pink on pink didn't look ideal and didn't really stand out. So I made sure again that that pink side was the side that was going to be covered up more often. So you can see it on the top and the bottom, but here on the left and the right, it's the white. Whereas if I had turned these over and put the pink all on this side, it's not so much of a problem of the patterned paper, but just another sort of like way to think about these kind of challenges. And then the same thing here, you could put the grid side on this side if you felt like that worked better for you. I thought the more solid side ultimately was the better choice for the edge where you would see more of it. And then in terms of embellishment, I have the die cuts that go with it. Actually, the reason I have this paper pad is scrapbook.com was giving away the die cuts as a freebie, I believe. If I'm remembering this all correctly. And I thought, oh, I'll just grab the pattern paper because if I'm getting the die cuts for free, if I grab the pattern paper, I'll make easy cards. It'll be great. And then I realized it was kind of a challenging paper pack to work with, but that's why I wanted to share it with you today. And so I have a lot of die cuts that go well with this particular paper pad. Now, cards like this, I'm actually really tempted to just leave it blank for now and go ahead and add a sentiment at a later date so that when I need a card, I can just make it say whatever I want. I could stamp a little hello or thanks right here. This is probably where I'd put it because it'd be nice and readable. Or even this one, because I could stamp a sentiment right here in this area, and I know, okay, I really need a thank you card, a birthday card, even just a general hello. Honestly, these could probably, I think either of these could go for sympathy. Like, florals are pretty popular for that. So I think there's a lot of purposes. So leaving them blank feels like the better thing to do. But then some of these I am encouraged to just go ahead and complete a card with them. Another great candidate for blank. But then I can just kind of pull in. Now this does not have a lot of sentiments. So I would recommend pulling in some die cut sentiments as well. Or some stamping. I think on this one particularly, you could put a little stamp in any of these, a small strip stamp, and then that would complete them nicely. I want to share last couple quick tips for finishing these cards. If you have some extra cardstock scraps from cutting the card mats, which you generally will, I recommend taking those and using that to prop up elements of the card that might be hanging off of other pieces of the card. So here everything will lay nice and flat because I put a little scrap of cardstock behind it. You can also take those little scraps of cardstock and glue a couple of them together and use that to pop up elements on your final card. So I picked a "You're Awesome" stamp just to keep it nice and general, and then I can add a little bit of this behind so that I can give it dimension without using up some foam tape. It gets rid of those scraps, especially those tiny scraps. I also was using the same bit of scrap to stamp off my sentiment a few times to make sure I was going to get a good impression, since I know it's just going to be kind of put underneath an element on my card. So that way I'm not grabbing a scrap paper or something for that. And then I will have a complete set of 6 cards, and I've used some of the more difficult patterned paper from this particular collection. If you found this video helpful, here's another video where you can find more ideas for enjoying your crafty time and supplies. Let me know you like this video with a share to your crafty community, subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the next template tutorial, and check the video description for product links. See you in the next video.